I never expected that at 64, I would have to fight for my life against my own son. My name is Katherine Anderson, and this is my story. Follow along until the end and let me know what city you're watching from in the comments. It all started on a crisp autumn morning when my son Kyle showed up at my doorstep unannounced. I was surprised to see him. His visits had become increasingly rare over the past year. He stood there with a wide smile I hadn't seen in ages, clutching a gold-trimmed envelope in his hands. "Mom!" he exclaimed, embracing me with unusual enthusiasm. "I have something amazing for you." I invited him in, of course. My small ranch-style home in Chicago wasn't fancy, but it was clean and comfortable, paid for with decades of hard work after my husband Thomas died when Kyle was just 12. I'd worked double shifts as a hospital administrator to send Kyle to the best schools, sacrificing vacations, new clothes, and any luxury for myself. Kyle sat at my kitchen table while I made coffee. He seemed oddly energetic, almost bouncing in his seat. "Mom, you've worked so hard your entire life," he said, sliding the envelope across the table. "You've sacrificed everything for me. It's time you had something special." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were cruise tickets, a 7-day luxury Caribbean cruise on the Caribbean Star. First class, departing in 2 days. "Kyle," I gasped, staring at the tickets. "This must have cost a fortune." He waved dismissively. "Don't worry about the cost, Mom. Heather and I want you to have this. You deserve to relax, get away from Chicago's winter, breathe some fresh sea air." Something in the way his eyes couldn't quite meet mine triggered a familiar sensation in my stomach. The same feeling I'd had when 12-year-old Kyle insisted he didn't know how the living room window got broken. But he was my son, my only child. The boy I'd nursed through chickenpox, taught to ride a bicycle, supported through college and his first heartbreak. "When do I leave?" I asked, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Day after tomorrow," Kyle replied, suddenly all business. "Everything's arranged. You just need to be at the port with your luggage. Heather took care of all the details." That night as I packed my suitcase, I couldn't shake a sense of unease. Kyle and Heather had been distant lately. Their visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly to hardly ever. Phone calls were brief and hurried. And now this lavish gift out of nowhere? I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Kyle had finally recognized all I'd done for him. Maybe Heather, after 5 years of cold politeness, had warmed to the idea of having a closer relationship with her mother-in-law. I packed my nicest clothes. Not that I had many. My wardrobe consisted mostly of practical items bought on sale. I carefully tucked in the blood pressure medication I'd been rationing due to its cost, my reading glasses, and the small photo album I always kept nearby. Pictures of Kyle growing up, Thomas before cancer took him, and happier family times. The morning of my departure arrived with gray skies threatening snow. Kyle had arranged for a taxi to take me to the port. I finished packing, double-checked everything, and was heading out the door when I realized I'd forgotten my blood pressure pills in the bathroom medicine cabinet. I hurried back inside, opening the door quietly. That's when I heard Kyle's voice coming from my living room. He was speaking on his phone, his tone completely different from the loving one he'd used with me 2 days ago. "Yes, Heather, she's already on her way to the port," he was saying. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing. The plan is going perfectly." I froze in the hallway, my hand gripping the door frame. "Mom's life insurance is for $200,000, Kyle continued, his voice clinical and detached. "And with the inheritance from the house, that'll be at least another $300,000. Enough to pay off all my debts and start over." My heart stopped. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "Don't worry, honey," Kyle said in a soothing tone that now made my skin crawl. "It's a one-way ticket. Once she's on the high seas, it'll be easy to make it look like an accident. No one is going to suspect a thing about an old woman who fell overboard. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. A fierce, burning rage swept through me, followed by an icy determination I hadn't felt in decades. I silently retrieved my medication and slipped out of the house. In the taxi, watching the streets of Chicago pass by the window, I realized I had raised a monster. My own son wanted me dead for money. I had two choices: stay home and confront Kyle, or get on that ship and somehow turn the tables. I chose the latter. If Kyle thought his mother was a helpless old woman, he was about to learn how wrong he was. During the entire taxi ride to the port, my mind raced faster than my heartbeat. I needed a plan. I needed allies. Most of all, I needed evidence. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved months ago but never used. Frank Reynolds, a private detective who had helped my neighbor Eleanor when her ex-husband was harassing her. Frank had given me his card, telling me to call if I ever needed help. "Detective Reynolds," a deep voice answered after 3 rings. "Hello, this is Catherine Anderson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We met at Eleanor Simmons' house a few months ago. I don't know if you remember me." "Of course I remember you, Mrs. Anderson. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. "I need to hire you for a very delicate matter. My son is trying to kill me." A pause. "Mrs. Anderson, that's an extremely serious accusation. Are you certain?" "I heard him planning my death with his own mouth," I replied, my voice hardening. "I'm in a taxi heading to the port right now. I'm supposed to be taking a Caribbean cruise, a gift from my son. But I just overheard him telling his wife it's a one-way trip for me." I explained everything I had heard. Frank listened without interruption. "Where exactly are you headed?" he asked when I finished. "The Caribbean Star cruise ship. It sets sail in 2 hours for the Caribbean islands." "I'll start investigating your son immediately," Frank said. "I'll look into his finances, any debts, everything I can find. Can you text me his full name and address?" "Yes, Kyle Thomas Anderson. He lives with his wife, Heather, at 1742 Oak Ridge Avenue." "Mrs. Anderson, listen carefully. You're going to be out of regular contact for 7 days. Take precautions. Don't be alone in isolated areas of the ship. Make friends. Document everything. If your son has someone on that ship, they'll likely approach you. Be vigilant, but don't show that you suspect anything." "I understand. I'll text you my bank account details for a $500 retainer. When you return, contact me immediately. And Mrs. Anderson, be careful." "I've survived 64 years in this world, Detective Reynolds," I replied, a new steel in my voice. "I've survived losing my husband, raising a child alone, and sacrificing everything for others. I won't let my own son defeat me now." The taxi pulled up to the port. The Caribbean Star loomed before me, a gleaming white colossus against the gray Chicago sky. Thousands of excited passengers streamed toward the boarding area, families taking photos, couples embracing, children running with excitement. For them, this was the beginning of a dream vacation. For me, it was a fight for survival. As I handed my documents to the boarding attendant, she smiled warmly. "Mrs. Anderson, how exciting. First time on a cruise?" "Yes," I replied, using the gentle, slightly wavering voice people expect from women my age. "My son gave me this trip. He says I need to relax." "What a considerate son," she commented, checking my documents. "He's surely going to miss you during these 7 days." "If only you knew," I thought bitterly. If only you knew he hoped these would be the last 7 days of my life. Walking up the boarding ramp, I was already formulating my strategy. I had 7 days to transform from prey to predator, 7 days to gather evidence, 7 days to prepare my counterattack against my own flesh and blood. My cabin was on the 8th deck with an ocean view, elegant, spacious, with a plush queen bed and a private balcony. Kyle had paid for the best, probably thinking it would be easier to make someone disappear from a private balcony than from an interior room. I set my suitcase on the bed and took a moment to compose myself. The shock of Kyle's betrayal was still reverberating through me, threatening to overwhelm my determination. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, and allowed myself 5 minutes to feel the pain. Just 5 minutes to mourn the son I thought I had. The boy who once made me Mother's Day cards with crayon hearts, who'd slept in my bed for a week after his father died, who'd promised to always take care of me. When those 5 minutes ended, I wiped my tears and began methodically exploring the cabin. I checked the lock on the balcony door, secure but not impossible to open from outside. I examined the main door, standard hotel-style lock with a deadbolt. I rummaged through the closet and found an unused doorstop, which I placed under the main door when inside. Next, I needed to explore the ship. If someone was going to try to harm me, I needed to know every escape route, every security camera, every public area where I'd be safer. The Caribbean Star was truly a floating city. 15 decks, multiple restaurants, casinos, shops, a theater, several swimming pools, even a rock-climbing wall. I walked each deck systematically, noting the locations of security stations, medical facilities, and staff-only areas. Most importantly, I observed the security cameras. They were everywhere in public spaces, but as I suspected, not on private balconies or in certain isolated areas like equipment storage zones. By late afternoon, I had created a mental map of the ship. I returned to my cabin to freshen up before dinner, making sure to wedge the doorstop under the door while inside. I changed into a simple navy dress, one of the few nice outfits I'd brought, and headed to the main dining room. The dining room was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waitstaff in formal attire. I was led to a table for 8, where I was the first to arrive. Gradually, other passengers joined. A retired couple from Florida, a family with teenage children from Wisconsin, and a woman about my age who introduced herself as Nancy Mitchell from Miami. Nancy was striking. Silver hair, elegantly styled, perfect posture, wearing a simple but clearly expensive red dress. Something in her alert blue eyes and confident demeanor suggested intelligence and strength. As dinner progressed, I participated in the conversation politely but guardedly, sharing only superficial details about myself. I observed everyone carefully, especially Nancy, whose occasional sharp glances around the room reminded me of a hawk surveying terrain. "So, Catherine," Nancy asked during dessert, "are you traveling alone?" "Yes," I replied. "My son gave me this cruise as a gift. He said I needed to relax." "How thoughtful," Nancy commented, studying my face. "My children insisted I take this trip too, said it was time I enjoyed life a little. I resisted at first, but finally gave in." "Same here," I said, feeling an instant connection with this woman. It's hard to accept gifts when you've spent your whole life being the giver. As we were finishing our coffee, I noticed a man sitting alone at the bar, watching our table. He was about 40, wearing a green button-down shirt and khaki pants, overdressed for the poolside bar area. When our eyes met briefly, he quickly looked away, but something in his gaze left me cold. "I think I'll turn in early," I announced to the table. "It's been a long day." Nancy stood as well. "I'll walk with you if you don't mind. My cabin's on deck 12. As we walked toward the elevators, I casually mentioned, "Did you notice the man at the bar in the green shirt? He seemed to be watching our table." Nancy nodded slightly. "I noticed. Professional habit. I was an insurance investigator for 25 years before retiring. I tend to notice when people pay too much attention." The elevator arrived, and we stepped inside. Once the doors closed, Nancy turned to me. "Catherine, forgive me for being forward, but you seem tense. Most people on their first day of a cruise are excited or overwhelmed, but you seem vigilant." I studied her face, weighing how much I could trust this stranger. Something about Nancy's direct gaze and no-nonsense demeanor made me want to confide in her, but Detective Reynolds' warning about being careful echoed in my mind. "It's just that this is my first cruise," I said carefully. "Everything is so new, so different. I guess I'm a little nervous." Nancy nodded, but her eyes told me she didn't completely believe me. "Look," she said as the elevator reached my floor, "I've been around long enough to recognize when someone's in trouble. If you need to talk, my cabin is 1247 on deck 12. I thanked her and got off on my floor, feeling her eyes on my back as the elevator doors closed. I walked to my cabin, constantly checking behind me. The corridor was empty, but the sensation of being watched persisted. Inside my cabin, I wedged the doorstop under the door and double-checked the balcony lock before calling Detective Reynolds. "Any updates?" I asked when he answered. "I've been digging into your son's finances," Frank replied. "It doesn't look good, Mrs. Anderson. Kyle has significant gambling debts, close to $350,000 from what I can tell so far. He owes money to some dangerous people." My stomach tightened. "That explains the life insurance policy he mentioned." "There's more," Frank continued. "I found evidence he's been taking out loans using your house as collateral, forging your signature on the documents. He's been doing this for at least 8 months. The betrayal cut deeper. Not only was Kyle planning my death, but he'd been stealing from me for months." "What about Heather, his wife?" "Still looking into her, but preliminary findings show multiple maxed-out credit cards and a shopping addiction. Between the two of them, they're drowning in debt." I sank onto the bed, processing this information. "I need more evidence, Frank. Something concrete that proves what they're planning." "Keep recording any calls from Kyle," Frank advised. "Try to get him to say something incriminating, and be extremely careful. If he has someone on that ship—" "I think he might," I interrupted. "There was a man watching me at dinner. Something about him felt wrong." "Description?" "About 40, dark hair, green shirt, athletic build. He was alone and seemed to be monitoring me. I'll see if I can identify any connection to Kyle. In the meantime, stick to public areas. Make allies if you can, but be selective about who you trust." After hanging up, I sat by the window watching the dark ocean slip past. Somewhere back in Chicago, my son was waiting for news of my accident. The thought should have devastated me, but instead, it crystallized my resolve. I would survive this, and Kyle would learn that underestimating his mother was the biggest mistake of his life. I slept fitfully that night, waking at every creak and sound of the ship. By morning, I was exhausted but alert, my senses heightened by the knowledge that someone on board might be watching me, waiting for an opportunity. I decided to have breakfast in my cabin, ordering room service rather than venturing to the crowded buffet. While I ate, I reviewed what I knew. Kyle wanted me dead for my life insurance and house. He had massive gambling debts. He likely had an accomplice on the ship, and I had 7 days to gather evidence before returning to Chicago. After breakfast, I ventured out, heading to the ship's library where I knew there would be computers with internet access. The connection was limited and expensive, but I could send quick messages. I sat at one of the terminals and composed a brief email to Detective Reynolds. "Investigating further today. Focus on Kyle's gambling contacts, possible connection to the man on ship. We'll be careful." As I was finishing, I noticed Nancy from dinner entering the library. She spotted me and approached, looking fresh and poised in white slacks and a blue blouse. "Good morning, Catherine," she said, taking the seat beside me. "I hope you slept well." As well as can be expected on a moving ship, I replied. Nancy leaned closer, lowering her voice. Catherine, may I be direct? I spent 25 years investigating insurance fraud, and I recognize someone in potential danger when I see them. You're not just nervous about your first cruise, are you? I studied her face, considering my options. Frank had warned me to be careful about whom I trusted, but I needed allies, and Nancy's background as an insurance investigator could be invaluable. Can we talk somewhere more private? I asked. We found a quiet corner in one of the ship's lounges, well within view of security cameras, but away from other passengers. I decided to test Nancy by revealing just a portion of the truth. Nancy, I overheard something disturbing before boarding this cruise, I began. My son Kyle gave me this trip as a gift, but when I went back home to get medication, I'd forgotten. I heard him on the phone with his wife. He said something about this being a one-way trip for me. I watched her reaction closely. Nancy's eyes narrowed, her posture subtly shifting to alert attention. You believe your son wants to harm you? She asked, her voice neutral but focused. I heard him mention my life insurance policy and the inheritance he'd get from my house, I said. He has gambling debts I didn't know about until recently. Nancy was silent for a moment, processing this information. That's a serious accusation, Catherine. Have you contacted authorities? I hired a private detective before boarding, but what can the police do? They can't arrest someone for a conversation I overheard, especially when that person wasn't explicitly saying they planned to kill me. Nancy nodded thoughtfully. And you still boarded the ship? Why not just stay home? Because I need evidence, I replied. If I confront Kyle with just my word against his, he'll deny everything. I need proof of what he's planning. Before Nancy could respond, I noticed the man in the green shirt from last night entering the lounge. Today he wore a blue polo, but it was unmistakably the same person. He glanced our way, then quickly turned toward the bar. I tilted my head slightly in his direction. That's the man I mentioned was watching our table last night. Nancy didn't turn to look. Instead, she casually repositioned herself to see the bar in her peripheral vision. I see him. Has he approached you yet? No, but he seems to be wherever I am. Just then, a young couple approached our seating area, looking for places to sit. Nancy and I fell silent as they settled nearby, our conversation effectively halted by their presence. Let's take a walk on the promenade deck, Nancy suggested, standing. The fresh air would do us good. As we walked toward the exit, I noticed the man in the blue polo subtly shift as if to follow. Nancy must have noticed too, because she suddenly changed direction, heading toward the women's restroom. We entered, and Nancy immediately checked under the stall doors to ensure we were alone. Catherine, she said in a low, urgent voice, that man is definitely tracking you. When we changed direction, he adjusted immediately. That's not coincidental behavior. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm bathroom. What should we do? First, we need to confirm he's actually following you, not me or someone else, Nancy said, her professional demeanor taking over. Second, we need to know who he is and who he's working for, though I suspect we both already know the answer to that. Nancy's belief in my story, without question or hesitation, sparked something in me. For the first time since overhearing Kyle's conversation, I felt less alone. How do we do that? I asked. We split up, Nancy replied. I'll leave first and go to the casino. You wait 5 minutes, then head to the pool deck. If he follows you rather than me, we'll have our first confirmation. The plan worked perfectly. After Nancy left, I waited several minutes, then made my way to the pool deck. Finding a lounge chair with good visibility, I pretended to settle in for sunbathing. Within 10 minutes, the man in the blue polo appeared, selecting a chair with a clear view of me but far enough away to not seem obvious. I texted Nancy, "Pool deck." He followed me. She replied almost immediately, "On my way. Don't acknowledge me when I arrive." 20 minutes later, Nancy appeared in a wide-brimmed sun hat and sunglasses, taking a chair on the opposite side of the pool. She appeared to be reading a novel, but I knew she was observing our mysterious follower. After about an hour of this surveillance dance, I gathered my things and headed toward the buffet for lunch. As expected, the man in the blue polo waited a few minutes, then followed. I selected a table with a clear view of the entrance and was halfway through my meal when Nancy slid into the seat across from me. "Our friend is at the bar again," she said quietly. "I took a photo of him with my phone and sent it to a former colleague who can run facial recognition. If he has any kind of record, we'll know soon." "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by her help. "Why are you doing this for me? We just met." Nancy's expression softened slightly. "Let's just say I've seen what desperate people can do for money. I've investigated too many cases where family members tried to eliminate their burdens for inheritance or insurance payouts." She paused. "Besides, my husband died because his business partner wanted the insurance money. I know what it's like to be targeted by someone you trusted." That revelation created an instant bond between us. Nancy wasn't just helping out of professional curiosity. She understood what I was facing on a deeply personal level. "What do we do next?" I asked. "We gather evidence," Nancy replied, her eyes hardening with determination. "And we set a trap." As we finished lunch, a ship announcement reminded passengers of the captain's gala scheduled for the following evening. Every passenger would be attending the formal event in the main ballroom, the perfect opportunity for someone to slip into an empty cabin. "That man will make his move during the gala," Nancy predicted. "We should be ready." As we were leaving the buffet, my phone rang. It was Kyle. Nancy's eyes widened and she whispered, "Answer it, but act normal. I'll record the conversation." I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, son." "Hi, Mom." Kyle's voice was cheerful, concerned, the perfect loving son. If I hadn't heard his earlier conversation, I would have believed the act completely. "How's the cruise? Are you having fun?" "It's beautiful, Kyle," I replied, injecting warmth into my voice. "The ship is incredible. Thank you for this generous gift." "You're welcome, Mom. You deserve it after everything you've done for me. Have you met any interesting people? Made any friends?" Nancy raised an eyebrow at this question. Why would Kyle care if I was making friends? "Yes, I met a very nice lady, Nancy. We've been having meals together." There was the briefest pause before Kyle responded. "That's great, Mom. It's good that you're not alone, but be careful too, okay? Sometimes on these cruises there are people who take advantage of older passengers." Nancy's eyes narrowed and she scribbled on a napkin. "He's warning you against allies." "Don't worry, son," I said, "I'm being very cautious. But tell me, how are things at home? How's Heather?" "Everything's fine, Mom. Heather sends her love. She hopes you're enjoying yourself." I decided to probe a little. "Kyle, can I ask you something? Why did you decide to give me this trip now? It was so unexpected." Another pause. "Well, Heather and I have been talking about you lately. We realized how tired and stressed you seemed and thought you needed to get away for a while, to completely disconnect." "Completely disconnect," I repeated, looking at Nancy. "Yes, I suppose sometimes that's necessary." "Exactly, Mom. Sometimes you need to step away from everything, don't you think?" "I guess so. Kyle, I was wondering, do you have copies of my return tickets? I only seem to have the boarding passes for the cruise itself." The silence that followed was telling. It stretched so long I thought the call might have dropped. "Kyle, are you there?" "Yes, sorry, Mom. Heather was asking me something about dinner." His voice had changed, becoming slightly higher. "Don't worry about the tickets. The travel agency has everything organized. You just need to enjoy the trip." But shouldn't I have my return flight information? What if there's a problem? Mom, Kyle's voice had an edge now. Please trust me. Everything is perfectly arranged. You have nothing to worry about. That's the whole point of the trip, for you to relax. All right, son. I trust you. Good, I love you, Mom. You. Enjoy the cruise. I love you too, Kyle. When I hung up, Nancy stopped her recording and looked at me with grim confirmation. He has no intention of you coming back, Catherine. I need to check something, I said, standing abruptly. The cruise office should have my complete travel itinerary. We went directly to the passenger services desk on deck 3, where a young woman named Sarah greeted us warmly. How can I help you ladies today? I need to verify my travel arrangements, I explained. My name is Catherine Anderson, cabin 847. Sarah typed on her computer, then frowned slightly. Mrs. Anderson, I see you have a reservation for the 7-day Caribbean cruise, but... She paused, looking confused. But what? Nancy asked. It's unusual, but there's no return transportation booked. Most of our packages include complete round-trip arrangements. Even though I had suspected this, hearing the official confirmation made my stomach drop. Who purchased this package? I asked. Sarah checked her screen again. It was bought by Kyle Anderson with his credit card. Is he a relative? He's my son, I replied, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Oh, well then, Sarah smiled. He'll surely arrange your return transportation, but I would recommend contacting him soon, as flights from St. Thomas to Chicago fill up quickly this time of year. Nancy interjected smoothly. Would it be possible for Mrs. Anderson to book a return flight now, just to be certain? Of course. Sarah typed for a few moments. I have a seat available on Sunday's 3:15 p.m. flight, the day the cruise ends. It's $7.85. I'll take it, I said immediately, pulling out my credit card. While Sarah processed the transaction, Nancy whispered, That's our first solid piece of evidence. Kyle deliberately purchased a one-way trip. With my return flight secured, we left the cruise office and found a quiet spot on the promenade deck to talk. We need to identify that man who's following you, Nancy said. And we need to understand exactly what he's planning. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Reynolds. Found connection between Kyle and a Richard Blackwood, former military, now works security for a gambling operation Kyle owes money to. Photo attached. I opened the attachment. It was the man in the blue polo. Nancy, I said, showing her the phone. His name is Richard Blackwood. He works for the people Kyle owes gambling debts to. Nancy's eyes hardened. This just got more dangerous, Catherine. These aren't amateurs. They're professionals who know how to make accidents look convincing. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. Hope you're enjoying your day, Mom. Make sure to check out the upper decks. The views are amazing. Nancy read the message over my shoulder. He's steering you toward the railings. I replied to Kyle. Thanks for the suggestion, but I've been enjoying the indoor activities more. The heights make me nervous. Kyle's response came immediately. Don't be afraid, Mom. The railings are completely safe as long as you're careful. You should really experience the open deck at least once. Nancy's expression was grim. He's setting the stage. If you fell from the upper deck, he'd tell investigators you were nervous about heights, but wanted to experience the view despite your fears. What do we do? I asked. We turn his plan against him, Nancy replied, a determined glint in her eye. But first, we need to speak to the captain. Captain Robert Wilson was a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades at sea. He invited us into his office after Nancy insisted it was a matter of passenger safety. Ladies, how can I help you today? He asked, gesturing for us to sit. Nancy took the lead, her former investigator persona evident in her precise professional tone. "Captain Wilson, we have reason to believe a passenger on your ship is in imminent danger." The captain's expression remained neutral, but his posture straightened slightly. "That's a serious claim. What evidence do you have?" I spoke up, my voice steadier than I expected. "Captain, my name is Catherine Anderson. My son gave me this cruise as a gift, but before boarding I overheard him discussing with his wife how it would be a one-way trip for me." I explained everything: the overheard conversation, Kyle's gambling debts, the life insurance policy, the one-way ticket confirmation, and Richard Blackwood's presence on the ship. Captain Wilson listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "Mrs. Anderson," he finally said, "if what you're telling me is accurate, we're dealing with a premeditated murder attempt on my vessel." "I understand how incredible it sounds," I replied. "But every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion." The captain turned to Nancy. "And you are?" "Nancy Mitchell, former senior investigator with Atlantic Insurance. I specialized in fraud and suspicious death cases. I've been helping Mrs. Anderson document this situation." Nancy played the recording of my phone conversation with Kyle. The captain listened intently, his frown deepening at Kyle's evasive response about the return tickets. "This is disturbing," Captain Wilson acknowledged, "but not yet conclusive evidence of intent to harm. What else can you show me?" I showed him the text messages from Kyle urging me to visit the upper decks, despite my supposed fear of heights, and the detective's confirmation about Richard Blackwood's identity. "Mrs. Anderson, Ms. Mitchell, I take passenger safety extremely seriously," the captain said after reviewing everything. "While I can't have Mr. Blackwood detained based solely on these suspicions, I can place him under discreet observation." "Captain," Nancy pressed, "we believe Mr. Blackwood will attempt to enter Mrs. Anderson's cabin during tomorrow night's gala when most passengers will be attending your event." Captain Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Here's what we can do. First, I'll assign security personnel to monitor the hallway near your cabin tomorrow night. Second, I'll have Mr. Blackwood's movements tracked by our security team. Third, I'll provide you with a panic button that connects directly to our security office." "Thank you, Captain," I said gratefully. "I should warn you," he added, "that if Mr. Blackwood does attempt anything, we'll need indisputable evidence to take action. Accusations of attempted murder are extremely serious." "We understand," Nancy replied. "We're not looking for confrontation, just protection and documentation." As we left the captain's office, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear because the danger was real and confirmed, but relief because I was no longer facing it alone. Nancy and I spent the rest of the afternoon formulating our plan for the gala. We decided I would attend as expected, wearing a distinctive emerald green dress so I would be easily visible. I would stay for approximately 2 hours, then announce loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear that I was returning to my cabin to rest. Instead of going to my cabin, however, I would go to Nancy's suite on Deck 12. Meanwhile, ship security would be monitoring my cabin, ready to intervene if Richard attempted to enter. That evening, my phone rang again. This time it was Heather, the first time she had called me directly in months. Nancy quickly set up to record the call as I answered. "Hello, Heather. What a nice surprise." "Rose, how are you?" Heather's voice was artificially cheerful. "How's the cruise going?" "It's lovely, thank you. The ship is beautiful." "That's wonderful. Kyle told me you spoke yesterday and that you're having a great time. We're so relieved to hear that." I decided to test her, just as I had with Kyle. "Actually, Heather, I have a question. Yesterday I went to the cruise office and they told me I don't have a return ticket. Do you know anything about that?" The pause that followed spoke volumes. "Oh, how strange," Heather finally replied, her voice higher than normal. Kyle handled all the details. There must be some system error. But don't worry, we'll take care of it. Actually, I already purchased my own return ticket just to be safe. Another telling pause. You bought your own ticket? You didn't need to do that, Catherine. We were going to handle it. I was worried about getting stranded in the Caribbean with no way home, I said innocently. Of course, I understand completely, Heather replied quickly. Well, enjoy the rest of your cruise. We'll see you when you get back. Heather, before you hang up, can I ask why you and Kyle decided to give me this trip? He mentioned you had been discussing me, but didn't explain what motivated such a generous gift. Well, it's just that, Heather stammered slightly. Lately we've noticed how tired you seem, Catherine, how stressed, and we thought you needed a long break. A long break? Yes. Get away from it all for a while. Sometimes you need to completely disconnect from daily life. The exact same words Kyle had used, as if they had rehearsed the answer. I see. Well, thank you for your concern. You're welcome, Catherine. Take care of yourself and enjoy every moment. When I hung up, Nancy stopped the recording and looked at me grimly. They're definitely in this together. The way she reacted when you said you'd purchased your return ticket, it's as if you threw a wrench in their plans. It's still hard to believe, I said, sitting heavily on Nancy's sofa. My own son and his wife planning my death so methodically. Nancy placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Catherine, in my 25 years as an investigator, I saw many cases like this. People can rationalize the most horrible actions when money is involved. They convince themselves they're not really doing anything wrong, that the victim is old, has lived their life, or would want to help them. I nodded, fighting back tears. Tomorrow's the gala. If Richard is going to make his move, it will be then. And we'll be ready for him, Nancy assured me. Get some rest. Tomorrow could be the most important day of your life. As I returned to my cabin that night, walking the brightly lit corridors with a security officer discreetly trailing behind me, Captain Wilson's arrangement, I thought about how my life had changed in just 3 days. I had gone from a supposedly beloved mother to a target, from a trusting parent to a woman fighting for survival. But I had also found unexpected strength within myself, a fierce determination I had forgotten I possessed. And in Nancy, I had found an ally whose expertise might just save my life. I secured my cabin door with a doorstop and double-checked the balcony lock. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation I was dreading, but also the evidence I needed. If Richard Blackwood attempted to harm me during the captain's gala, he would be caught red-handed, and Kyle would learn that his mother wasn't the easy target he thought she was. As I lay in bed watching the moonlight dance on the ocean waves outside my window, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of betrayal, not just from Kyle, but from Heather, too. The pain was almost physical, a crushing pressure in my chest. But beneath the pain burned a steady flame of resolve. I would survive this. I would expose their plot, and I would ensure they faced consequences for what they had tried to do to me. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end, not for me, but for Kyle's murderous plan. Morning dawned with a brilliant Caribbean sunrise streaming through my cabin window. I had slept surprisingly well, perhaps because for the first time since discovering Kyle's betrayal, I had a plan and allies. After a quick breakfast delivered to my room, I headed to Nancy's suite to finalize our strategy for the evening's gala. Nancy answered her door looking as put together as ever in tailored linen pants and a silk blouse. Her cabin was twice the size of mine with a separate living area and a spacious balcony. "Good morning, Catherine," she greeted me. "Come in. I've already had coffee with Captain Wilson. The security preparations are in place." As I settled on her sofa, Nancy handed me a steaming cup of coffee. You look well rested. That's good. You'll need your wits about you tonight. I feel stronger today, I admitted. Having you and the captain believe me, having a plan, it makes all the difference. Nancy nodded, understanding in her eyes. When my husband was killed, no one believed me at first when I said his business partner was responsible. I spent 6 months gathering evidence before the police took me seriously. Her expression hardened. By then, his partner had spent half the insurance money. I'm sorry, I said, genuinely moved by her story. Did they ever charge him? Yes. He's serving 20 years for first-degree murder. Nancy straightened her shoulders, dismissing the painful memories. But we're not going to let things get that far with your case. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Reynolds. More on Kyle's finances. He's $350K in debt to a gambling operation run by the Marino family. Very dangerous people. Also found he's taken out 3 loans against your house in the past 8 months, totaling $175K, all with forged signatures. I showed Nancy the message, my hand trembling slightly. This confirms our suspicions, she said grimly. Kyle didn't just decide to eliminate you on a whim. This has been planned for months. Forging loan documents, setting up the cruise, hiring Blackwood. I felt physically ill thinking about how methodically my son had plotted my death. How could he do this? I gave him everything. People like Kyle don't see it that way, Nancy replied, her voice softer. They feel entitled to what they have, and when they're in trouble, they look for the easiest solution, not the right one. My phone rang. It was Kyle again. Nancy immediately set up to record the conversation. Remember, she whispered, act normal, but try to get him to say something revealing. I took a deep breath and answered, Good morning, Kyle. Mom, how's day 4 of paradise? His voice was cheerful, relaxed, as if he weren't waiting for news of my demise. It's beautiful, I replied, injecting warmth into my voice. I'm actually getting ready for the captain's gala tonight. Oh, that sounds fancy. Are you going to dress up? Yes, I brought that emerald green dress you always liked. I paused. The one I wore to your college graduation. A slight hesitation. That's perfect, Mom. You'll look great. What time is the gala? Nancy raised an eyebrow at this question. Why would Kyle need to know the timing? It starts at 8 and goes until midnight, I believe. Everyone on the ship will be there. It's quite the event. That's nice, Mom. After the party, make sure you go straight back to your cabin to rest. Don't wander the decks at night. They can be slippery. Nancy's eyes widened. Kyle had just given me explicit instructions about where to be after the gala. I will, Kyle. Don't worry. My cabin is so comfortable. That private balcony is worth every penny you spent. I'm glad you like it, Mom. The fresh air is good for you. We chatted a bit more about mundane matters before hanging up. Nancy stopped the recording and looked at me with grim satisfaction. That was perfect, Catherine. He practically told you to be in your cabin after the gala, where Blackwood will be waiting. My hands were shaking as I set down the phone. It's so cold-blooded. He's talking to me as if he cares, all while orchestrating my murder. Nancy squeezed my hand. That's why we're going to stop him. A knock at the door interrupted us. Nancy checked the peephole before opening it to reveal a young woman in a ship officer's uniform. Mrs. Anderson, Ms. Mitchell, I'm Security Officer Ashley Peterson. Captain Wilson asked me to brief you on tonight's security arrangements. Ashley was in her early 30s with short brown hair and alert eyes that missed nothing as she scanned the room. She pulled out a tablet and showed us a deck plan of the ship. We'll have 2 plainclothes officers positioned here and here, she indicated points near my cabin. 3 security cameras have been repositioned to cover the hallway and your cabin door. I'll be in the security office monitoring the feeds in real time. What about inside my cabin? I asked. If Blackwood gets in before we can stop him, we can't legally place cameras inside passenger cabins, Ashley explained. But we've installed a silent alarm on your balcony door and main entrance. The moment either is opened after 8 p.m., we'll know. Nancy frowned. That still gives Blackwood time to harm Mrs. Anderson if he gets inside before we can respond. That's why we've developed this. Ashley handed me what looked like an ordinary cruise card on a lanyard. This appears to be your standard room key, but it contains a panic button. Press it 3 times in succession, and security will immediately respond to your location. I examined the card. It looked identical to my regular room key. One more thing, Ashley added. We've been monitoring Mr. Blackwood since your meeting with the captain. He's made 3 phone calls to a Chicago number in the past 24 hours. Can you trace who he's calling? Nancy asked. We don't have that authority on board, Ashley replied. But we've recorded the number. It's registered to a Kyle Anderson. The confirmation sent a chill through me, even though I'd expected it. Now there was no doubt. Richard Blackwood was working directly with my son. Officer Peterson, I said, thank you for everything you're doing. Ashley nodded seriously. Mrs. Anderson, in my 5 years working ship security, I've never encountered a situation quite like this. But I promise you, we won't let anything happen to you. After Ashley left, Nancy and I refined our plan further. We decided that I should appear as vulnerable as possible at the gala, having a few very visible glasses of champagne, though I would only be pretending to drink, mentioning loudly to nearby passengers that I was tired and returning to my cabin, and walking with a slight unsteadiness when I left. We want Blackwood to think you're an easy target, Nancy explained. The more confident he feels, the more likely he is to make a mistake. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense anticipation. I spent time on the promenade deck, deliberately making myself visible, but always in crowded areas with plenty of security cameras. Several times I spotted Blackwood watching me from a distance, never approaching but always present. At 5:00 p.m., I returned to my cabin to prepare for the evening. Nancy accompanied me, and we carefully checked every corner of the room, every potential hiding place. Once satisfied the room was secure, Nancy helped me get ready for the gala. As I put on my emerald green dress, a simple but elegant garment I'd bought years ago for Kyle's graduation, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same person who had boarded this ship 4 days ago. There was a hardness in my eyes, a set to my jaw that spoke of determination rather than fear. "You look formidable," Nancy commented, seeing my expression. "I don't feel formidable," I admitted. "I feel betrayed, angry, and sad, but I refuse to be a victim." Nancy nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the attitude that will get you through tonight." Before leaving my cabin, I tucked the special room key with the panic button into my small evening bag. Nancy would attend the gala separately, keeping watch from a distance. As a final precaution, I texted Detective Reynolds. "Gala tonight. Security believes Blackwood will make his move. We'll update when it's over. If you don't hear from me by morning, contact Chicago PD immediately." His response came quickly. "Security team is in place. Don't take any unnecessary risks. I've notified a contact at Chicago PD about the situation as a precaution." With a final deep breath, I left my cabin and headed toward the main ballroom, feeling as though I were walking into battle rather than a celebration. The captain's gala transformed the main ballroom into a scene from another era. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, staff in white gloves serving champagne, and a live orchestra playing classics. Passengers had embraced the formal dress code, with men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns creating a sea of elegance. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, pretending to sip while scanning the crowd. Captain Wilson stood near the entrance greeting guests, looking distinguished in his formal uniform. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod as I passed. For the next hour, I played my role, chatting with other passengers, occasionally pretending to take a sip of champagne, and making sure to be visible from all angles of the room. Nancy was positioned near one of the buffet tables, elegant in a black evening gown, keeping watch while appearing to enjoy the party. At 9:30 p.m., I spotted Richard Blackwood entering the ballroom. He wore a well-fitted tuxedo and carried himself with military precision. His eyes swept the room methodically until they landed on me. When our gazes met briefly, I quickly looked away, pretending to be flustered. Nancy had moved closer to me and murmured as she passed, "He's here. Start phase 2. I began the next part of our plan, appearing increasingly tired and slightly tipsy. I deliberately spoke a bit louder than necessary to a couple seated near me. "I think I might call it an early night," I announced, checking my watch. "These old bones need their rest, and my cabin balcony is the perfect place to unwind with this beautiful ocean air." The couple smiled politely, unaware of the drama unfolding around them. I stood, making a small show of steadying myself against the table. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked. "Oh, yes," I laughed lightly. "Just not used to champagne anymore. My cabin's on deck 8. I think I'll head back and get some sleep." From the corner of my eye, I saw Blackwood shift, listening to my conversation while pretending to check his phone. I made my way to the exit, deliberately taking a meandering path. As I left the ballroom, I glanced back once to see Blackwood speaking quietly into his phone, presumably reporting to Kyle that I was heading to my cabin. Instead of going to the elevators that would take me to deck 8, I walked around a corner and waited in a small alcove where Nancy and I had planned to meet. She arrived 2 minutes later. "He's on the move," she whispered. "Let's go." We took a service elevator to deck 12 and hurried to Nancy's suite. Inside, Ashley Peterson was already waiting with a laptop connected to the security feed showing the corridor outside my cabin. "Mrs. Anderson, Ms. Mitchell," Ashley greeted us tensely. "Everything is in position. Security officers Matthews and Ramirez are stationed at both ends of the corridor, out of sight but ready to move in." We gathered around the laptop, watching the empty hallway with mounting tension. For 20 long minutes, nothing happened. Could he have changed his mind? I wondered aloud. "No," Nancy said firmly. "He's being cautious, making sure you've had enough time to settle in. He wants you relaxed, possibly asleep." At 10:17 p.m., the feed showed Blackwood entering the corridor, now dressed in dark pants and a black polo shirt. He moved with the silent efficiency of someone with military training, pausing to listen at intervals. When he reached my cabin door, he glanced both ways before pulling something from his pocket. "He's picking the lock," Ashley whispered, though there was no way he could hear us. She spoke rapidly into her radio. "Subject is at the target door, attempting entry. Stand by." We watched, barely breathing, as Blackwood worked on the lock. In less than 30 seconds, the door opened and he slipped inside. "Security team, move to positions but do not engage yet," Ashley ordered into her radio. "We need to catch him in the act." The feed switched to a view of my balcony from a camera on the deck above. For several minutes, there was no movement. Then the balcony door slid open and Blackwood stepped out, examining the railing carefully. He pulled out a small tool and began working on the lower section of the railing. "He's tampering with the safety barrier," Nancy said, her voice tight, "making it look like it gave way accidentally." "Security team, move in now," Ashley commanded. The corridor feed showed 2 officers approaching my cabin door with keycards drawn. They entered silently, and for a few agonizing moments, we couldn't see what was happening. Then Ashley's radio crackled. "Subject apprehended on the balcony. No resistance. We found tools and what appears to be a sedative in his possession." Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees nearly buckled. Nancy steadied me with a firm grip on my arm. "We got him," she said, her eyes bright with triumph. "And we have everything on camera." "Let's go," Ashley said, rising. "The captain will want to speak with you immediately." We hurried to the security office on Deck 2, where Captain Wilson was waiting. Behind a glass partition in an adjoining room, Richard Blackwood sat handcuffed to a table, his face expressionless. "Mrs. Anderson," the captain greeted me gravely, "we've apprehended Mr. Blackwood with clear evidence of his intentions. We found these in his possession." He gestured to a table where several items were displayed: lock-picking tools, a syringe containing a clear liquid, a small bottle labeled as a muscle relaxant, and a cell phone. "The security team caught him in the act of tampering with your balcony railing," Captain Wilson continued. "Combined with the sedative he was carrying, his intentions seem clear: drug you and stage an accident." "Have you checked his phone?" Nancy asked. "We're just about to. As a cruise ship, we have limited authority, but threats to passenger safety fall clearly within our jurisdiction." A security officer connected Blackwood's phone to a computer and began scrolling through messages. My breath caught as a conversation with Kyle appeared on screen. "Wait until after the gala. Make sure she's in her cabin. The balcony is the cleanest way. No signs of struggle. Make it look like an accident. She was old, had too much to drink, lost her balance." Kyle's instructions were cold, methodical, and utterly damning. "I believe this constitutes sufficient evidence," Captain Wilson said quietly. "Mr. Blackwood will remain in our brig until we reach port, at which point he'll be handed over to authorities. Mrs. Anderson will need you to file formal charges." "I will," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I have recordings of conversations with my son that further demonstrate his involvement." While we were discussing next steps, Blackwood requested to speak with the captain. After a brief private conversation, Captain Wilson returned, looking grim. "Blackwood has offered to cooperate fully in exchange for consideration during his prosecution," he informed us. "He claims he was hired by your son to ensure you had an accident during the cruise. He was promised $50,000, half up front, half upon completion." The cold calculation of it all, my life valued at $50,000, made me physically ill. "There's more," Captain Wilson added hesitantly. "Blackwood says your son told him the plan had to be executed now because his wife is pregnant, and they need your inheritance for their fresh start." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Pregnant? Heather was pregnant with my grandchild, and still they had plotted my death? Nancy must have seen my distress because she immediately guided me to a chair. "Catherine, breathe. Just breathe." I struggled to process this new information. My son and his wife were expecting a baby, a child who would never know its grandmother because they had decided I was worth more dead than alive. "Captain," I said when I could speak again, "I need to call Detective Reynolds in Chicago immediately. With Blackwood captured, Kyle needs to be stopped before he can flee." As the captain arranged for me to use a secure line, my phone rang. It was Kyle. Nancy and the security team quickly set up to record the conversation. "Answer it," Captain Wilson advised. "Act normal, but try to get him to reveal more." I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Kyle." "Mom?" His voice was oddly strained. "How was the gala?" "Beautiful," I replied, forcing lightness into my tone. "I'm just getting back to my cabin now." I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 11:30 p.m., a plausible time for me to be returning. "Oh, good. Did you enjoy yourself?" "Very much. The champagne was excellent. I may have had a glass too many." I forced a small laugh. "Well, get some sleep, Mom. I'm sure you're tired." "I will. The balcony doors are open and the sea air is wonderful. I might sit out there for a while before bed." A pause. "Just be careful, Mom. Don't lean against the railing if you've been drinking." The warning was so transparent now that I knew his plan. "I'll be careful, Kyle." By the way, I've been meaning to ask, how are things with you and Heather? Anything new in your lives I should know about? Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean? Oh, I don't know. You two have seemed distracted lately. I wondered if something was happening. Good news, perhaps? Everything's fine, Mom. Nothing special to report. He was lying about the pregnancy, too. The depth of his deception was staggering. Well, good night then, Kyle. I'll call you tomorrow. Good night, Mom. Sleep well. When I hung up, everyone in the security office was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and sympathy. Mrs. Anderson, Captain Wilson said, that was remarkably composed given the circumstances. I didn't feel composed. I felt hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out of me. The son I had raised, loved, sacrificed for. He was a stranger to me now. I need to call Detective Reynolds, I said, my voice distant even to my own ears. Kyle needs to be arrested before he realizes his plan has failed. As the captain handed me the secure phone, Nancy squeezed my shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Catherine. Remember that. Detective Reynolds answered immediately. Mrs. Anderson, are you safe? Yes, I replied. Blackwood has been caught and has confessed everything. He had text messages from Kyle detailing the plan. Thank God. Frank sounded genuinely relieved. I've been monitoring Kyle's movements. He's at home right now with his wife. I've already contacted Chicago PD with the evidence we've gathered. They're preparing to make an arrest, but they wanted confirmation of Blackwood's capture first. There's something else, I added, my voice catching. Heather is pregnant. They were planning to use my inheritance for their new family. A long silence followed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson. That makes this situation even more tragic. What happens now? The police will arrest Kyle and Heather tonight. With the evidence from the cruise ship, Blackwood's confession, the financial records, and your recordings, they'll be facing serious charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud for the forged loan documents. They're looking at substantial prison time. The reality of what this meant struck me fully. My son would go to prison. My grandchild would be born while both parents were incarcerated. The family I had sacrificed everything for would be irreparably broken. But the alternative, my death, was unthinkable. Do what needs to be done, I said finally. I'll be back in Chicago in 3 days. After finishing with Detective Reynolds, I turned to Captain Wilson. Thank you for believing me and for your help in catching Blackwood. Mrs. Anderson, he replied solemnly, in my 30 years at sea, I've learned to trust my instincts about people. When you and Ms. Mitchell came to me with your concerns, I saw a woman fighting for her life, not someone making wild accusations. I'm just glad we were able to prevent a tragedy. None. As Nancy and I left the security office, the exhaustion of the evening finally caught up with me. My legs felt weak, and my mind was foggy with emotional overload. Come stay in my suite tonight, Nancy offered. You shouldn't be alone, and I don't think you should return to that cabin. I nodded gratefully, unable to form words. As we rode the elevator to Deck 12, I leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling every one of my 64 years. In Nancy's suite, she poured me a real glass of brandy, not the pretend champagne from earlier, and sat beside me on the sofa. I know this feels like the end of something, she said gently, but it's also a beginning. You've discovered strength in yourself that you probably forgot you had. My son tried to kill me, I whispered, the words still impossible to fully comprehend. And now he'll go to prison. His child, my grandchild, will be born with both parents incarcerated. Nancy didn't offer empty consolations or platitudes. Instead, she simply sat with me, allowing me the space to feel the full weight of what had happened. Years ago, she said after a long silence. When I was investigating my husband's murder, I felt like my entire world had collapsed. Everything I thought was true wasn't. Everyone I thought I could trust was suspect. But you know what I discovered? I looked at her questioningly. I discovered that when everything falls apart, you find out what you're truly made of. And Catherine, from what I've seen these past few days, you're made of steel. I didn't feel like steel. I felt brittle, like ancient glass that might shatter at the slightest touch. But somewhere beneath the pain and betrayal, I recognized the truth in Nancy's words. I had faced the worst possible betrayal and had fought back. I had refused to be a victim. "Get some sleep," Nancy advised, showing me to her bedroom while she took the sofa. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but you've already overcome the hardest part." As I lay in bed that night, I thought about Kyle as a little boy, his gap-toothed smile when he lost his first tooth, his proud face when he learned to ride a bicycle, his tears when his father died. Where had that child gone? At what point had he transformed from the son I loved into a man capable of matricide? I didn't have answers. Perhaps I never would. But as sleep finally claimed me, one certainty remained. I had survived. And tomorrow, I would begin figuring out what my life would look like, now that everything had changed. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of Nancy's suite and the gentle rocking of the ship. For a few blissful moments, I existed in the peaceful space between sleep and wakefulness, before the events of the previous night came flooding back. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Detective Reynolds. "Kyle and Heather Anderson arrested at 3:17 a.m., both in custody. We'll update with more details when available." So it was done. My son and his wife were in jail for conspiring to murder me. The reality of it was still too enormous to fully comprehend. I found Nancy in the living area of the suite, already dressed and speaking quietly on her phone. When she saw me, she quickly ended her call. "Good morning, Catherine. There's coffee on the table. How did you sleep?" "Surprisingly well," I admitted, pouring myself a cup. Detective Reynolds texted, "Kyle and Heather have been arrested." Nancy nodded. "I just spoke with Captain Wilson. He says they'll be transferring Blackwood to authorities when we dock tomorrow in St. Thomas. They want you to be prepared to give a formal statement." I sipped my coffee, trying to organize my thoughts. What happens now? With Kyle and Heather, I mean. They'll be charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud for the forged documents, serious felonies. Given the evidence against them, they're looking at significant prison time. "And the baby?" I asked, the thought of my unborn grandchild weighing heavily on my mind. Nancy's expression softened. "That's more complicated. Typically, if both parents are incarcerated, the child would go to next of kin or into the foster system if no family is available." "I'm next of kin," I said quietly. "Yes, you are. But Catherine, that's a decision you don't need to make right now. Let's focus on getting through the next few days." A knock at the door interrupted us. Nancy checked the peephole before opening it to reveal Officer Ashley Peterson. "Mrs. Anderson, Miss Mitchell," she greeted us. "Captain Wilson asked me to inform you that Mr. Blackwood is requesting to speak with Mrs. Anderson." I set down my coffee cup with a shaking hand. Why would he want to speak with me? He didn't say. "The captain wanted me to assure you that you're under no obligation to meet with him. This is entirely your choice." I considered for a moment. Blackwood was the man hired to kill me, but he was also a key witness against Kyle. Speaking with him might provide insights I couldn't get elsewhere. "I'll see him," I decided. "But I want Nancy with me." "Of course," Ashley nodded. "And I'll be present as well." 30 minutes later, we were led to a secure room adjacent to the ship's brig. Richard Blackwood sat at a small table, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked different from the confident man who had been stalking me. Smaller somehow, his military bearing diminished by his circumstances. "Mrs. Anderson," he acknowledged as I entered with Nancy and Ashley. "Thank you for coming." I took the seat across from him, meeting his gaze steadily. "Why did you want to see me?" "To apologize," he said simply. "Not that it matters much now, but I want you to know this isn't what I signed up for." "You were hired to kill me," I stated flatly. "What exactly did you think you were signing up for?" Blackwood had the grace to look ashamed. "Kyle told me you were terminally ill, said you had late-stage cancer and were in pain but refusing treatment. He claimed you tried to take your own life twice, and the cruise was a way to give you peace while protecting the family from scandal." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Kyle had constructed an elaborate lie to rationalize my murder even to his hired killer. "As you can see," I finally said, "I'm perfectly healthy." "I realized that after observing you for a few days," Blackwood admitted. "But by then, I'd already taken half the payment. The Marino family doesn't allow refunds." "The gambling operation Kyle owes money to," I clarified. Blackwood nodded. "Kyle owes them over $300,000. They were getting impatient. When he approached them about solving a family problem, they connected him with me. I normally handle security for them, not this kind of work." "Yet you were willing to murder an innocent woman." "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mrs. Anderson. Just telling you that your son is even more deceitful than you realize. He's manipulated everyone around him, his wife, me, the Marinos." "What about Heather?" I asked. "How involved was she?" "Completely. She was the one who suggested the cruise. Said it would be the perfect cover. Elderly woman, tragedy at sea, grieving family left behind." His expression darkened. "She's cold, that one. Colder than Kyle." I absorbed this. Another layer of betrayal to process. "The baby," I said suddenly. "Is Heather really pregnant?" Blackwood looked surprised. "Yes, about 4 months along from what I gathered. They talked about needing a fresh start for the baby. New identities, new location. The life insurance in your house were going to fund their disappearance after paying off the Marinos." So it was true. Somewhere in a Chicago jail cell, Heather was carrying my grandchild, a baby who would now be born into a nightmare not of its making. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, rising to my feet, "thank you for your honesty, belated though it may be. I hope you realize that nothing you've said changes what you tried to do." "I know," he replied quietly. "But Mrs. Anderson, watch your back even after Kyle and Heather are locked up. The Marino family doesn't like loose ends, and you're a significant loose end." A chill ran through me at his warning. I hadn't considered that the danger might extend beyond Kyle and his immediate plans. As we left the brig, Nancy looked concerned. "Catherine, we should take his warning seriously. These gambling operations are dangerous." "I'll speak with Detective Reynolds," I assured her. "He needs to know about this new threat." Back in Nancy's suite, I called Frank and related everything Blackwood had told me, including the warning about the Marino family. "I'm already aware of the Marinos," Frank confirmed. "They're a mid-level operation, dangerous but not cartel level. I've notified my contacts in the organized crime division. They've been wanting to build a case against the Marinos for years. Your situation might give them the opening they need." "What about Kyle and Heather? Have they said anything?" "Kyle is denying everything, claiming you're confused or imagining things. Heather, however, started talking the moment they separated them. She's trying to pin everything on Kyle, saying he coerced her into the plan." "And the pregnancy?" "Confirmed. She's 17 weeks out." I closed my eyes, processing this. "Frank, what will happen to the baby?" A pause. "Eventually, the courts will determine custody. Given that both parents are likely facing lengthy prison terms, they'll look to family members first. As grandmother, you would have priority if you choose to pursue custody." The idea was overwhelming, raising my would-be murderer's child at 64. Yet the alternative, my grandchild in foster care, seemed equally unthinkable. "I need time to think about that," I said finally. "Of course. For now, focus on getting home safely. We can discuss next steps when you're back in Chicago." After hanging up, I turned to Nancy, who had been discreetly giving me privacy during the call. "Kyle is denying everything. Heather is blaming him for everything, and I have to decide whether to take custody of their child." Nancy sat beside me on the sofa. "Catherine, listen to me. You've shown incredible strength these past few days, but don't feel you need to make all these decisions immediately. Give yourself time to process what's happened." I nodded gratefully. "I just keep thinking, how did I miss the signs? How did I raise a son capable of this?" "You didn't miss anything," Nancy said firmly. "Some people make choices that have nothing to do with their upbringing. Kyle is responsible for his actions, not you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Captain Wilson arranged for me to move to a new cabin for our final night on the ship, as mine was still considered part of the crime scene. I gave formal statements to the ship's security team and spoke with a representative from the FBI via satellite phone, as crimes committed in international waters fell under federal jurisdiction. By evening, I was emotionally and physically exhausted. Nancy suggested we have a quiet dinner in her suite rather than facing the crowded restaurants, and I gratefully accepted. As we ate, Nancy shared more about her life, her 30-year marriage to David before his murder, her career as an investigator, her 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren in Miami. "You should come visit when this is all over," she offered. "Florida is lovely in winter, and I have plenty of room." "I might take you up on that," I replied, surprised to find myself contemplating a future beyond the immediate crisis. "I've never been to Florida." "It would do you good," Nancy insisted. "New places, new experiences. They help put the past in perspective." Later that night, as I prepared for bed in my temporary cabin, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Anderson?" a female voice asked. "This is Judith Lambert, Heather's mother." I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "Mrs. Lambert, please call me Judith. Her voice broke. "I just learned what Heather and Kyle were planning. I'm so sorry, Catherine. So deeply, profoundly sorry." Her genuine distress touched me. Here was another mother whose child had betrayed everything she'd taught them. "Judith, you're not responsible for their actions," I said, echoing Nancy's earlier words to me. "I know, but still, I can't imagine what you must be feeling." She paused. "Catherine, I also learned about the baby. My grandchild. Our grandchild." "Yes," I acknowledged. "I wanted you to know that if you don't feel you can take custody when the time comes, Robert and I would raise the child. We're in our early 60s, still healthy and active." The offer surprised me. I hadn't considered that Heather's parents might want custody. "That's very generous," I said carefully. "To be honest, I haven't made any decisions yet. This has all been overwhelming." "Of course," Judith replied quickly. "I just wanted you to know there are options. Whatever happens with Kyle and Heather, this baby deserves a chance." After we hung up, I stared out the window at the moonlit ocean, thinking about Judith's call. The baby would have 2 sets of grandparents who wanted it, regardless of its parents' crimes. That, at least, was something positive in this nightmare. Tomorrow we would dock in St. Thomas. Richard Blackwood would be transferred to federal custody, and I would board my return flight to Chicago, the flight Kyle never intended for me to take. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized something surprising. Despite the pain, betrayal, and uncertainty, I was no longer afraid. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same determination that had kept me alive on this cruise. Kyle had underestimated me once. He wouldn't get the chance to do so again. The final morning on the Caribbean Star dawned clear and brilliant, the island of St. Thomas visible on the horizon as we approached port. I stood on the deck watching the lush green mountains grow larger, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The immediate danger had passed. Richard Blackwood was in custody, and Kyle and Heather were in jail awaiting arraignment. But returning to Chicago meant facing the aftermath. Legal proceedings, financial complications from Kyle's forgeries, decisions about my unborn grandchild, and the shattered remnants of what I'd thought was my family. Nancy joined me at the railing, her silver hair blowing in the gentle breeze. "Beautiful morning," she commented. "How are you holding up?" "I'm trying to prepare myself for what comes next," I admitted. "Going home feels like stepping into another kind of storm." "You won't be alone," Nancy assured me. "I've decided to come to Chicago with you, at least for a few days." I turned to her in surprise. "Nancy, you don't have to do that. You've already done so much." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Her eyes held mine steadily. "Catherine, what we've been through together creates a bond. Besides, I have experience with the legal process in cases like this. You could use an advocate who understands the system." Tears welled in my eyes unexpectedly. After decades of being the strong one, always giving support rather than receiving it, Nancy's offer touched something deep within me. "Thank you," I managed, briefly squeezing her hand. As the ship docked, Captain Wilson approached us. "Mrs. Anderson, federal agents are waiting to take custody of Mr. Blackwood and to take your formal statement. Officer Peterson will escort you to the meeting room when you're ready." I nodded. "I'd like to thank you again, Captain, for everything you and your crew have done. If not for your willingness to believe me and act quickly—" "No thanks necessary," he replied warmly. "This ship is my responsibility, and every passenger's safety is paramount." He hesitated, then added, "If I may say so, Mrs. Anderson, you've shown remarkable courage throughout this ordeal. Many people would have collapsed under such circumstances." After the captain left, Nancy and I returned to our cabins to finish packing. At 10 o'clock a.m., Ashley Peterson arrived to escort me to the meeting with federal agents. The meeting was conducted in a private conference room near the ship's administrative offices. 2 FBI agents, a serious young woman named Agent Diaz, and an older man introduced as Agent Whitman, took my statement, recorded my account of events, and collected the audio recordings Nancy and I had made of conversations with Kyle, Heather, and Blackwood. "Mrs. Anderson," Agent Diaz said as we concluded, "your evidence will be extremely valuable in building the case against your son and daughter-in-law. We'll likely need you to testify when this goes to trial." "I understand," I replied, the thought of facing Kyle in court simultaneously terrifying and necessary. "We've also opened an investigation into the Merino gambling operation based on information from Mr. Blackwood," Agent Whitman added. "Your cooperation could help bring down a dangerous criminal enterprise." "I'll help however I can," I assured them. As we prepared to disembark, I felt a growing anxiety about returning to the house where Kyle had plotted my death, to the city where he and Heather were now in custody, to the life that had been irreparably altered. "Are you sure you don't want to come to Miami with me first?" Nancy asked, sensing my unease. "You could take some time, regroup before facing everything in Chicago." I considered her offer seriously. A reprieve, a chance to catch my breath in a new environment, was tempting, but something in me needed to confront this head-on. "Thank you, but no. I need to go home to reclaim my life. Running away, even temporarily, feels like giving Kyle a victory he doesn't deserve." Nancy nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Then I'm coming with you, as I said." We disembarked together, pulling our luggage through the bustling port of Charlotte-Amalie. As we made our way toward the airport shuttle, I spotted Richard Blackwood being led away in handcuffs by federal agents. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. He gave me a slight nod, almost respectful, before being placed in a waiting vehicle. "There goes the man who was supposed to kill me," I murmured to Nancy. "And instead he's going to help put Kyle away," she replied. Life has a way of creating unexpected justice. The flight from St. Thomas to Chicago felt surreal. While other passengers chatted about their vacations and souvenirs, I was returning from a cruise where my own son had arranged for my murder. The contrast was almost too stark to comprehend. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, I gazed out the window at the familiar skyline, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Nancy, seated beside me, placed a reassuring hand over mine. "One step at a time," she said simply. Detective Frank Reynolds was waiting for us at the arrival gate, his tall figure easy to spot in the crowd. He greeted me with genuine relief. "Mrs. Anderson, I can't tell you how glad I am to see you safe." "Thank you for everything you did, Frank," I replied, introducing him to Nancy. As we drove toward my house, Frank updated me on developments with Kyle and Heather. They're being held without bail, pending arraignment. Kyle continues to deny everything, claiming you misunderstood what you heard, and that Blackwood acted independently. Heather, however, has been more cooperative. She's offered to testify against Kyle in exchange for a reduced sentence. "She's trying to save herself," Nancy commented from the back seat. "Exactly," Frank agreed. "She's painting herself as a victim of Kyle's manipulation, claiming she went along with the plan out of fear. Do you think the prosecutor will accept her deal?" I asked. "Possibly. Her testimony would strengthen the case against Kyle, but with Blackwood's confession and the evidence we already have, it's not essential. The DA will make that call." As we turned onto my street, anxiety tightened my chest. The small ranch house I'd called home for 30 years came into view. The house Kyle had used as collateral for his secret loans. The house he had expected to inherit upon my death. Frank parked in the driveway and insisted on checking the house before Nancy and I entered. After confirming it was secure, he carried our bags inside while I stood in the living room, taking in the familiar surroundings with new eyes. This was where Kyle had stood talking on the phone about my accident. This was where he had casually discussed collecting my life insurance. The home that had once represented security now felt tainted by his betrayal. "Catherine?" Nancy's voice broke through my thoughts. "Should I put on some coffee?" "Yes, please," I replied, grateful for her practical suggestion. "The kitchen is through there." While Nancy busied herself in the kitchen, Frank showed me the documentation he'd gathered about Kyle's financial deceptions. Loan agreements with my forged signature, bank statements showing large withdrawals, evidence of payments to the Marino gambling operation. "The fraud charges alone could put him away for years," Frank explained. "Add the conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder charges, and he's looking at potentially 20 years or more." The reality of it, my son spending decades in prison, hit me with fresh force. Despite everything Kyle had done, a part of me still struggled to reconcile the smiling boy in the photos on my mantle with the man who had plotted my death. Nancy returned with coffee, her observant eyes noting my distress. "Frank, I think that's enough for today. Catherine needs rest." He nodded, gathering his papers. "Of course. Mrs. Anderson, I'll be in touch tomorrow. The prosecutor will want to meet with you soon to prepare for the arraignment." After Frank left, Nancy and I sat in silence, sipping our coffee. The emotional weight of the past week seemed to descend all at once, leaving me drained and disoriented. "I keep wondering when I'll wake up from this nightmare," I confessed. "When I'll discover it was all a terrible misunderstanding." Nancy's expression was compassionate but firm. That's normal, Catherine. But you know this is real. The evidence is overwhelming. I know, it's just, how do I live with this knowledge? How do I reconcile the son I thought I raised with what he tried to do? You don't, Nancy replied simply. Not right away. You give yourself permission to grieve for the son you thought you had, for the relationship you've lost, for the family that will never be the same. And then, day by day, you begin to build a new life. The wisdom in her words resonated deeply. This wasn't something I could think my way through or rationalize. It was a profound loss that required mourning before healing could begin. That evening, as Nancy settled into my guest room, I sat alone in my bedroom looking at old photo albums. Pictures of Kyle as a toothy kindergartner, as a serious middle schooler after his father died, as a proud high school graduate. Where had that boy gone? At what point had he become capable of plotting his mother's murder? My phone rang, startling me from my reflections. It was Judith Lambert again. Catherine, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to check if you'd made it home safely. Yes, thank you, Judith. I arrived a few hours ago. I'm glad. She hesitated. I've spoken with Heather. She's not the daughter I thought I raised. The things she's admitted to planning. I heard the same bewilderment and pain in her voice that I felt about Kyle. I understand, believe me. Catherine, I was wondering if you might be willing to meet with Robert and me sometime soon, to talk about the situation, about the baby. I know it's a lot to ask, given what our children tried to do to you, but I think that would be a good idea, I said, surprising myself with the realization that I meant it. We're connected now, whether we wanted to be or not, and the baby deserves for us to communicate. We arranged to meet for lunch the following week, after I'd had time to settle in and meet with the prosecutor. As I hung up, I felt a small measure of peace. At least Heather's parents seemed decent people, concerned about doing the right thing. I returned to the photo albums, closing them gently and putting them away. Those memories belonged to the past, a past that had suddenly been revealed as partially illusory. Now I needed to focus on the present and the difficult choices that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring meetings with prosecutors, financial advisors to address Kyle's forgeries, and the beginning of legal proceedings that would likely stretch for months. But tonight, I allowed myself the luxury of simple exhaustion, crawling into bed and letting sleep claim me. My last thought before drifting off was not of Kyle or the cruise or the danger I'd escaped. Instead, I thought of Nancy's invitation to visit Florida, of the possibility of new experiences and friendships in a life I never expected to have. Perhaps that was the first tiny seed of a future beyond betrayal, a future I would build on my own terms. The first morning back in my Chicago home brought a stark reality check. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as I made coffee, illuminating the familiar space that now felt irrevocably changed. Nancy emerged from the guest room looking remarkably put together, despite our late arrival the previous night. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, accepting the mug I offered. "A few hours," I admitted. It's strange being back here, knowing what Kyle was planning while standing in this very room. Nancy nodded sympathetically. "First days are always the hardest. What's on the agenda today?" "The assistant district attorney wants to meet at 11. Then I need to see my bank about the forged loan documents." My phone rang. Detective Reynolds calling with an update. "Mrs. Anderson, I wanted to let you know that Kyle and Heather are being arraigned this morning. The charges are conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and forgery. The DA is requesting they be held without bail." "Will I need to be there?" I asked. "No, not for the arraignment. But the prosecutor, Sarah Thompson, is expecting you at 11. I can drive you if you'd like." I accepted his offer, grateful for his continued support. After hanging up, I found Nancy watching me with concern. "I'll be fine," I assured her, though my trembling hands betrayed me. "It's just hearing the charges spoken aloud makes it so real." "Of course it does," Nancy replied. "You're facing something most people couldn't even imagine. But remember, you've already survived the worst part. You outsmarted them. You're still here." Her words bolstered my resolve. I was still here, despite Kyle's meticulous planning. That fact alone was a victory I needed to hold on to. At 10:30, Frank arrived to drive us to the district attorney's office. The downtown government building was imposing, all glass and steel and officialdom. We were escorted to a conference room where Assistant District Attorney Sarah Thompson was waiting. Sarah was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of focused efficiency. She greeted us with a firm handshake. "Mrs. Anderson, thank you for coming in. This is a complex case, and your testimony will be crucial." For the next hour, Sarah reviewed the evidence against Kyle and Heather. My recorded conversations, Blackwood's confession, the financial records showing Kyle's forgeries, the cruise ship security footage of Blackwood tampering with my balcony railing. "The evidence is substantial," Sarah confirmed. "Kyle Anderson is facing 20 to 25 years if convicted on all counts. Heather Anderson is looking at 15 to 20 years. The numbers were staggering. My son would be in his 60s before he was released. My unborn grandchild would be an adult." "Heather has offered to testify against Kyle," Sarah continued. "She claims he was the mastermind and that she went along out of fear." "Do you believe her?" I asked. Sarah's expression remained neutral. "We're evaluating her claims. Blackwood's testimony contradicts her story somewhat. He indicated she was an active participant, not a reluctant accomplice." "What about the baby?" I asked, the question that had been weighing on me since learning of Heather's pregnancy. "The court will determine custody arrangements closer to the birth. As grandmother, you would have priority if you wish to pursue custody. Otherwise, the child would likely go to other family members or into foster care." The responsibility of that decision pressed on me heavily. Could I raise my would-be murderer's child? Could I look at that innocent face every day without seeing echoes of Kyle's betrayal? "Mrs. Anderson," Sarah said, seeming to read my thoughts, "you don't need to decide anything about custody right now. Focus on the immediate legal proceedings." After finishing with Sarah, we headed to my bank. The manager, Mr. Patel, had been notified about Kyle's forgeries and was waiting for me in a private office. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm deeply sorry about this situation," he said, genuine concern in his eyes. "We've flagged all the fraudulent documents and frozen the associated accounts." Mr. Patel showed me the 3 loans Kyle had taken out using my house as collateral, $75,000, $45,000, and $55,000, all with what appeared to be my signature. "The forgeries are good," he admitted, "but now that we know to look for them, we can see discrepancies." "What happens to these loans now?" I asked, staring at my son's handiwork. "Since they were obtained fraudulently, the bank will pursue restitution from Kyle Anderson, not from you or your property. We'll file the necessary paperwork today to remove these liens from your home." Relief washed over me. At least I wouldn't lose my house because of Kyle's actions. By late afternoon, exhaustion had set in. Nancy suggested we pick up takeout rather than attempting to cook, and I gratefully agreed. As we ate Chinese food in my living room, the reality of the past week finally caught up with me. I set down my chopsticks, unable to continue pretending normalcy. "I keep thinking I should have seen this coming," I confessed, tears threatening. "There must have been signs." Nancy set aside her own food. "Catherine, listen to me. People who commit these kinds of betrayals are often masterful at deception. Kyle spent years learning exactly how to appear as the loving son you wanted to see. But to plan my death so coldly. I couldn't complete the thought. The why matters less than what happens next, Nancy said firmly. And what happens next is entirely up to you. What do you mean? I mean that you get to decide what your life looks like now. Not Kyle, not the courts, not the past. You. Her words struck something deep within me. The realization that despite everything that had been taken from me, I still had choice. I still had agency. I still had a future, however altered from what I'd imagined. That night, lying in bed, I allowed myself to consider possibilities I'd never contemplated before. Without the weight of Kyle's expectations or supposed needs, what did I want for myself? What dreams had I deferred or abandoned that might now be rekindled? The questions had no immediate answers, but asking them felt like the first tentative step toward healing. 3 days after returning to Chicago, I received a call from Sarah Thompson. Mrs. Anderson, Kyle's attorney has requested a meeting between you and Kyle. You're under no obligation to agree. My heart stuttered. Why does he want to see me? He claims he wants to explain himself, to apologize. But I should warn you that these meetings are often attempts to manipulate victims or pressure them into dropping charges. I thought carefully about what seeing Kyle might mean. The pain would be immense, but there were questions only he could answer. Questions that haunted my sleepless nights. I'll meet with him, I decided. But I want you present, and Nancy Mitchell as well. Sarah arranged the meeting for the following morning at the detention center. That night I barely slept, rehearsing what I might say to the son who had planned my death. Nancy accompanied me to the meeting, her steady presence a ballast against my churning emotions. We were led to a small conference room where Sarah was waiting. Minutes later, Kyle was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. A guard positioned himself by the door. My first sight of Kyle nearly undid me. He looked pale and haggard, his usually meticulously styled hair disheveled. But it was the familiarity that hurt most, the shape of his eyes so like his father's, the chin that had always been stubbornly set even as a toddler. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Nancy's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Kyle continued when I remained silent. "I know you probably hate me right now." "I don't hate you, Kyle," I finally said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I don't understand you. I don't recognize you. But I don't hate you." Kyle's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. I never wanted to hurt you. Blackwood misinterpreted what I was asking him to do." The transparent lie stoked a sudden anger in me. "Stop. Just stop. They have the recordings, Kyle. They have your text messages to Blackwood. They have the forged loan documents. There's no misunderstanding." "I was desperate," he pleaded, dropping the pretense. "The gambling debts, the people I owed money to, they were threatening to hurt Heather, to hurt me." "So you decided to hurt me instead," I stated flatly. "It wasn't like that. I convinced myself it would be quick, painless, that you'd never know." The cold calculation in his words sent a chill through me. "And that made it acceptable? That I wouldn't know you were murdering me?" Kyle's face crumpled. "I messed up, Mom. I messed up so badly. But please, you have to help me. If you tell them you forgive me, that you don't want to press charges." "No," I interrupted, a strange calm settling over me. "I'm not doing that, Kyle. Actions have consequences. Your father taught you that. I taught you that. Somewhere along the way, you decided that rule didn't apply to you. Mom, please, he begged, real fear now visible in his eyes. I'm going to be a father. I can't raise my child from prison. You should have thought of that before you planned to deprive your child of a grandmother, I replied, standing up. I've heard enough, Sarah. Wait, Kyle called as I turned to leave. What about the baby? My baby? I paused, looking back at my son, this stranger wearing Kyle's face. That child will be cared for and loved, whether by me or by Heather's parents, that's yet to be determined. But unlike you, we won't abandon an innocent life when it becomes inconvenient. As Nancy and I left the conference room, Kyle's broken sobs echoed behind us. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, suddenly unsteady. You did well, Nancy said quietly. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, I admitted, but it was necessary for both of us. Later that afternoon, Sarah called to inform me that Kyle's attorney had approached her about a plea deal. He's offering to plead guilty to conspiracy and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence, 15 years instead of 25. What do you think? I asked. Honestly? It would spare you a trial, which can be grueling for victims, and 15 years is still substantial time. She paused. But this is your decision, Mrs. Anderson. You're the one most affected by his crimes. I considered what a trial would mean, having to testify, having to relive every painful detail, having my family's darkest moments made public record. Yet there was also the matter of justice. I'll accept the plea deal, I decided, but only if he admits to everything. No minimizing, no claiming it was a misunderstanding. The record needs to show exactly what he did. Sarah agreed to present my conditions. 2 days later, she called back to confirm Kyle had accepted. He'll formally plead guilty next week. 15 years, with possibility of parole after 12, contingent on his full admission of guilt. Heather's situation proved more complicated. Her attorney was pushing hard for leniency due to her pregnancy and her claims of coercion by Kyle. After much negotiation, she agreed to plead guilty to being an accessory to attempted murder and fraud, resulting in a 7-year sentence. The plea agreements brought a measure of resolution, but questions about the baby remained. I arranged to meet with Judith and Robert Lambert at a quiet restaurant downtown. They arrived looking much as I felt, shell-shocked, aged by grief and confusion. "Catherine," Judith greeted me, embracing me awkwardly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Of course," I replied, settling into my seat. "We have important matters to discuss." Robert, a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair, spoke directly. "Catherine, we want you to know that we're as horrified by Heather's actions as you must be. We raised her to know right from wrong, to value human life. This is incomprehensible to us." "I understand completely," I assured them. "I've been asking myself the same questions about Kyle." "The baby is due in 4 months, Judith said, her hand unconsciously moving to her own stomach. "Heather will give birth in custody." The thought of that child born in a prison medical ward, surrounded by guards instead of family, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "What are your thoughts about custody?" I asked carefully. Judith and Robert exchanged glances. "We'd like to raise our grandchild," Robert said. "We're still young enough, healthy enough, but we recognize your claim as Kyle's mother is equally valid." "And we would never try to keep the child from you," Judith added quickly. "You would always be welcome in our grandchild's life." Their openness moved me. These people had every reason to avoid me, to see me as the woman whose testimony had sent their daughter to prison. Instead, they were offering shared grandparenthood. "I've been wrestling with this decision," I confessed. "Part of me feels obligated to raise Kyle's child myself, but at 64, starting over with an infant, I trailed off, then gathered my courage to speak my truth. I think the baby would be better off with you as primary caregivers, with me as a very involved grandmother. The relief on their faces was palpable. We would welcome that, Judith said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. This child deserves all the love and stability we can provide. We spent the next hour discussing practical arrangements, how I would visit, holidays, what the child would call each of us. By the time we parted, I felt lighter, as if a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted. Nancy was waiting at my house when I returned. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I replied, settling beside her on the sofa. "They're good people, Nancy. The baby will be well loved with them. And you'll be part of that child's life," she affirmed. "Yes," I nodded, feeling more certain of my decision. "I'll be Grandma Catherine, who visits often and spoils shamelessly, but who also has her own life." "Speaking of which," Nancy said, "have you given any thought to what comes next for you, after the legal matters are settled?" I hadn't, not consciously, but Nancy's question crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since our return. "I don't think I can stay in this house," I admitted. "Too many memories, too many shadows. I'm thinking of selling it, maybe buying a small condo downtown." "That sounds like a positive step," Nancy encouraged. "And I might take you up on that invitation to visit Florida," I added with a small smile. "I've never seen the ocean outside of a cruise ship." "My door is always open," Nancy assured me, her eyes warm with friendship. That night I walked through my house room by room, seeing it not as the home where I'd raised Kyle, but as an asset I could transform into a new beginning. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, the living room where Kyle had opened Christmas presents, the backyard where he'd practiced baseball. All of it could be converted into resources for a different life than the one I'd planned. The realization wasn't painless, but it held promise. At 64, I was being given an unexpected opportunity to reinvent myself. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The following weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings and practical arrangements. Kyle formally entered his guilty plea in a subdued courtroom, admitting to conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder for hire, and multiple counts of fraud. Hearing him recite his crimes in a monotone voice was surreal, like watching a stranger who happened to look like my son. Heather's plea hearing followed a week later. Unlike Kyle, she broke down repeatedly during her statement, alternating between blaming Kyle and expressing what appeared to be genuine remorse. I found myself pitying her despite everything. This young woman who had allowed greed and desperation to override basic humanity. Richard Blackwood, who had been transferred to Chicago, accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against the Marino gambling operation. His cooperation resulted in a 5-year sentence rather than the 15 he might have faced. With the legal matters largely resolved, I turned my attention to rebuilding my life. I listed my house with a real estate agent who assured me the property would sell quickly in the current market. I began looking at condominiums in downtown Chicago, drawn to the idea of walkable neighborhoods and buildings with security. Nancy extended her stay, helping me sort through decades of accumulated possessions. We created piles for keeping, donating, and discarding, a physical manifestation of the emotional sorting I was doing internally. "What about these?" Nancy asked one afternoon, holding up Kyle's high school sports trophies. I considered them for a moment. "Store them," I decided. "His child might want them someday." We worked our way through the house methodically, room by room. The process was cathartic, deciding what parts of my past to carry forward and what to leave behind. "You know," Nancy observed as we boxed up kitchen items, "you've changed since I met you on that cruise ship." "How so?" "You're more decisive, more certain of yourself, less willing to accommodate others at your own expense." Her assessment surprised me, but I recognized its truth. The woman who had boarded the Caribbean Star, accommodating, self-sacrificing, defining herself primarily as Kyle's mother, was not the woman now packing up her life for a new beginning. My house sold within 2 weeks, and I found a bright, modern condominium in a secure building near Millennium Park. The transaction would leave me with substantial savings, even after purchasing the condo outright. Financial security I hadn't anticipated at this stage of life. As my moving date approached, I received a letter from Kyle. I sat with it unopened for several days, uncertain whether reading his words would help or harm my healing process. Eventually, curiosity won out. "Dear Mom," he had written in the careful penmanship I'd insisted he develop as a child. "I don't expect forgiveness. What I did is unforgivable. But I need you to know that I understand now the enormity of my betrayal. The counselor here says I've spent my life feeling entitled to your sacrifices, seeing them as my due rather than the gifts they were. I'll be in prison until my child is a teenager. I've asked myself what I would feel if someone tried to harm my baby the way I tried to harm you, and the answer terrifies me. How did I become capable of such cruelty toward the person who gave me life, who gave me everything? I don't ask for reconciliation. I don't deserve it. I only ask that someday you might tell my child that there was good in me once, before I lost my way so catastrophically. With deepest remorse, Kyle." I set the letter aside, tears blurring my vision. There was sincerity in Kyle's words, but also the enormous chasm that now existed between us, a breach that might never be fully repaired. The day before my move, Nancy helped me pack the last few items. "I've been thinking," she said casually. "Why don't you come to Florida with me for a couple of weeks before settling into your new place? The condo will still be here, and you could use a proper vacation. One without murder attempts." Her suggestion made me laugh despite myself. "You know, that sounds perfect." 2 days later, I boarded a plane to Miami with Nancy, my first true vacation in decades. Her waterfront home was elegant and welcoming, with the expansive deck overlooking Biscayne Bay. For the first time since discovering Kyle's betrayal, I felt genuinely relaxed, embraced by the Florida sunshine and Nancy's easy hospitality. "I've invited my children and grandchildren for dinner tomorrow," Nancy informed me the first evening. "They're eager to meet the woman who helped catch a would-be killer on a cruise ship." "You make it sound like I'm some kind of detective," I protested. "Aren't you?" Nancy smiled. "You gathered evidence, set a trap, outsmarted a professional criminal. Sounds like detective work to me." Meeting Nancy's family was a revelation. Her 3 grown children with their spouses, her 5 grandchildren ranging from 8 to 17. They welcomed me without reservation, curious about our adventure, but also respectfully mindful of the painful circumstances. Nancy's eldest daughter, Jennifer, pulled me aside after dinner. "Mom told us what you've been through," she said softly. "I just wanted to say how much we admire your courage." "I didn't feel courageous," I admitted. "Just determined to survive." "That is courage," Jennifer insisted. "And from what Mom says, you're rebuilding beautifully." Over the next 2 weeks, Nancy showed me her Florida, not just the tourist attractions, but the hidden beaches, the family-owned restaurants, the botanical gardens she volunteered at twice weekly. I found myself relaxing into the rhythm of her life, enjoying the warmth and brightness after Chicago's winter gloom. "You could stay longer, you know," Nancy suggested as we watched the sunset from her deck. "Or come back whenever you like. My guest room is always available." "I might take you up on that," I replied, realizing I meant it. "But I need to get settled in Chicago first. The baby will be born in a few months, and I want to be present for that." Nancy nodded understandingly. "The future grandmother needs to prepare." "Exactly, though future grandmother sounds much better than woman whose son tried to kill her for inheritance money." Nancy laughed, a rich, genuine sound that I'd come to treasure. Catherine Anderson, did you just make a joke about your murder attempt? I believe I did, I answered, surprised by my own capacity for dark humor. That's progress, isn't it? Significant progress, Nancy confirmed, raising her wine glass. To survivors who refuse to be merely victims. I clinked my glass against hers. To unexpected friendships forged in crisis. And to second acts, Nancy added. Yours is just beginning. When I returned to Chicago, my new condominium was waiting, a blank canvas ready for the next chapter of my life. I arranged my carefully curated possessions, deliberately creating a space that honored select memories while leaving room for new experiences. 3 months later, Judith Lambert called with news that Heather had gone into labor. I drove immediately to the hospital where Heather would be giving birth under guard. In the waiting room, I found Judith and Robert looking anxious but excited. "Catherine!" Judith embraced me warmly. "We're so glad you're here." 5 hours later, a nurse appeared with news. "It's a boy," she announced. 6 pounds, 9 ounces. Mother and baby are doing well. "Have you seen him?" I asked Judith. "Not yet. They're cleaning him up now." She hesitated. "Would you like to come with us for the first visit?" I nodded, suddenly emotional. Together, the 3 of us were led to a small room where Heather lay in a hospital bed, a tiny bundle in her arms. 2 corrections officers stood discreetly by the door. Heather looked up as we entered, her face a complex mixture of joy, sorrow, and shame. "Mom, Dad," she acknowledged. Then her eyes found mine. "Catherine, thank you for coming." I approached the bed cautiously, looking down at the infant in her arms. He had a shock of dark hair like Kyle's, and tiny, perfect features that bore no trace of the circumstances of his conception or the crimes of his parents. "His name is Thomas," Heather said softly, "after Kyle's father, if that's okay." The gesture, naming the child after my late husband, caught me off guard. "It's more than okay," I managed. "It's perfect." Heather carefully transferred the baby to Judith's waiting arms, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, Dad, Catherine, I know I have no right to ask anything of any of you, but please love him enough for both Kyle and me during these years we can't be there." "We will," Robert promised, gently touching his grandson's cheek. "He'll know he's loved every day." When it was my turn to hold Thomas, I looked down into his sleeping face and felt an unexpected peace settle over me. This child represented both the worst and best of possibilities. Born from betrayal, yet offering a future unmarred by his parents' choices. "Hello, Thomas," I whispered. "I'm your Grandma Catherine, and you, little one, are going to be just fine." As I carefully passed Thomas back to Heather for their brief time together, before he would go home with Judith and Robert, I realized something profound. The cruise that was meant to end my life had instead transformed it. I had discovered strength I'd forgotten I possessed. I had found friendship with Nancy that enriched my days. And now, this tiny boy offered a connection to family that was complicated but genuine. Kyle had failed in his attempt to eliminate me for inheritance money. What he couldn't have anticipated was that his actions would ultimately free me from obligation, from self-sacrifice, from a life defined solely by motherhood. At 64, I was starting again, not despite Kyle's betrayal, but because of it. The painful catalyst had forced me to reclaim myself, to remember the woman who existed before and beyond being Kyle's mother. As I left the hospital that day, I called Nancy to share the news of Thomas's birth. "He's beautiful," I told her, "and I'm going to be part of his life, but on my terms." "As it should be," Nancy approved. "How does it feel?" I considered her question as I walked to my car under a bright spring sky. "It feels like Possibility, I answered finally. Like I've been given time I never expected to have, and I intend to use it well. That, Nancy replied, sounds exactly right. 3 months later, I boarded a plane to Miami again, this time not running from trauma, but moving confidently toward joy. Nancy was waiting at the airport, her arms open in welcome. "Ready for your swimming lessons?" she asked as we drove toward her home. I laughed, thinking of the schedule we'd planned. Swimming in the mornings, volunteering at Nancy's botanical garden in the afternoons, dinner with her family twice a week. "Ready for everything," I answered, and realized with quiet certainty that it was true. The woman who had boarded the Caribbean Star, believing her life was essentially over, had discovered instead that it was just beginning anew, different than planned, marked by scars of betrayal, but vibrant with possibility nonetheless. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.